The NBA trade deadline is in just a few short days. Will the Detroit Pistons end up moving off of anybody on the roster? We're going to talk about that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So we're going to be talking about the trade deadline for the entirety of today's episodes on February 8th at 3 p.m. I'm recording this on February 6th around 3 p.m. You guys will be listening to this probably like an hour after I record it. So in about 2 days, about 48 hours, the trade deadline will be here. So it's going to be a trade deadline-centric episode, so stay tuned for that. But first, I got to give a shout-out to who got the last synergy chart correct for the Pistons over the last 10 years. This one was guessed by Brent Whitten on Twitter. It was DJ Augustine in 2014-2015. And for today's screenshot, we are looking at a player who played for the Detroit Pistons in the past 10 years. They had 251 spot-up attempts in their season, 83rd percentile, transition 136 possessions, 77th percentile, pick-and-roll ball handler 102 possessions, 92nd percentile, one-on-one possessions in the handoffs, 53rd percentile, isolations, 78 possessions, 77th percentile, and in post-ups, 57 possessions, 43rd percentile. So a really good offensive player, spent a lot of his possessions spotting up, but also dabbled in a lot of other things and was pretty good at all those things as well. So which Detroit Piston is that and what season is it from over the last 10 years? Let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. Now, let's get into the trade deadline. I told you guys, I believe on 3 episodes ago, I told you guys to be ready for what was going to be said to the fans after the trade deadline. We talked about even in the last episode, the last segment of the last episode, we kind of hit on. We've been talking about this, I'd say, like the last week and a half, because I saw this coming based on some of the things that were being said nationally, some of the things I have heard, and how the Pistons were acting, the moves that they were doing, the way they were moving. I did not expect the Detroit Pistons to make any moves at this deadline. I said a few days ago, expect for them to not make any moves and to very quickly hear about how they have plans for the offseason. They have flexibility. They have a plan. It's going to happen in the offseason. Just be patient. They're going to be able to build a team. They have cap space. They have flexibility. They have young players. Just be patient. That's why I told you guys to be ready to hear. That's what I expected to happen. Now, just a few days ago, actually I'm recording this on the 6th, posted on the 5th, James Edwards III of The Athletic, the Detroit Pistons beat writer, wrote an article titled Pistons Trade Deadline Part 2, What I'm Hearing About Zach LaVine, Tobias Harris, and more. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, obviously. You guys should all have an Athletic subscription because James does great work and provides a lot of details for the Detroit Pistons. But basically in here, he talks about how it could be a very quiet one. Quote, the sense that I'm getting is it could be a quiet time, end quote. And the other piece that I really want to say here is this. Remember, I told you guys what you guys would start hearing immediately. As soon as it started to sound like, or the deadline passed, or if it was starting to be said the Pistons would do nothing, you guys would start to hear about how they have salary cap space, be patient, they have young guys, they have a plan for the offseason, blah, 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 blah. That's what you would hear instantly to try and cover not making any moves in this horrible season. In this article, James says, according to the Detroit Pistons and what he's hearing about the Pistons, more than anything, it appears the Pistons do have possibilities, both big and small, but remain focused on hanging on to their young core while keeping both their non-player assets and financial flexibility for the immediate future, per league sources. Is that not almost exactly what I told you guys they would start being said? And my issue is this. This is my issue with what the Pistons are. It sounds like the Pistons are going to do. Now, again, James says this in his article. I've said this to you guys now multiple times as well. anything can happen over the next 2.5 days. Maybe something changes. Maybe there's a change of heart in the front office. Maybe ownership steps in. Maybe a deal presents itself that wasn't available beforehand. Like, anything can happen over the next 2.5 days. But as of right now, it looks like the Pistons are going to have a quiet deadline. This is my issue. It's not about, and I think this is where a lot of the confusion in the Pistons community comes from. It's not about trading one of the core 4 guys. And when I say core 4 guys, obviously it's Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and Asar Thompson. It's not about trading one of those guys. I don't think anyone, actually, let me not say anyone. There is a section of the fan base that wants to see one of those guys moved because they don't believe that they can fit. And I think questioning their fit is completely fine to do. That's fair. I am not on here saying you have to trade one of those guys, nor am I sitting here saying that they should. Like, that's not the thing that's going to upset me. And that's not going to be the thing I think they majorly fail on with this deadline. It's going to be their refusal to move off of anybody in a season like this. The Detroit Pistons have 6 wins. Again, I'm going to say it again. The Detroit Pistons have 6 wins. They are competing for the worst record in NBA history. This season was a complete and utter failure. You have failed at every single turn possible. When it comes to development, when it comes to seeing what you need to see from some of your core 4 guys. We haven't even seen them get real minutes until this past week. Like, it's been a failure in every which way you possibly can. And one of the things that this front office, I feel, in my opinion, has failed at year after year after year after year is asset management. In this season that's already finished, if you're not going to, remember, a few weeks ago, I believe it was in December, at the end of December, early January, I came on here and said that you need to, whoa, what just happened? For those of you guys watching on YouTube, my light just went out for a second and came back on. That was okay. Anyways, you guys will remember at the beginning of January, end of December, I came on the podcast and said they need to make a move that helps this team get better and can, what's the word I'm looking for? Can put a better product on the floor and help develop the young guys. No, it won't lead to playoffs, but at least you'll have 3-4 months to see what these guys look like when they have good pieces around them, when they have maybe another all-star kind of player next to them. Are they growing? Do they play good basketball? Maybe they can have an Orlando Magic type season where they start off 5-20, and then the next few months they play 500 basketball. Now they're heading into the next season. Yeah, you didn't make the playoffs, but heading into the next season, you can say, okay, we made this move for this guy. It looked really good for the rest of the year. We expect to be really good to start next year. We expect to look really good. That's what I wanted them to do. But if they're not going to do that, if they're not going to try to do that for the rest of this season, then you need to get as much assets as you can for the guys that have value on your team that are not the core 4. Guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, guys like Alec Burks, guys like Monte Morris, anybody else that has any type of value that's not a part of your core 4, you should be getting assets for, because this season's lost. What is keeping them going to do? You're not going out and getting another player to change what this looks like. We see what this looks like. It's not good basketball. It's done. Everything about this team is done. This season is over with. Now, again, like I said, if you're going to go out there and let's say, again, I'm just going to use this example because it looked like the Pistons and what I've said on the podcast and now based off reports, Zach LaVine was real. Let's say they were to go out and get Zach LaVine and Zach LaVine didn't get surgery. Now, if you were to do that and you wanted to see, okay, how do they look with Zach LaVine and these pieces, and you want to see if they can play really good basketball for the rest of the year, then okay, then you keep those pieces so you can see how does it look, and then if you can have a really good, mindset and optimism heading into the next year, like I just said, okay, we didn't have a good year, but once we made this move, we looked really good. We can feel good about going to the next year. If that's how the front office wanted to handle it, then fair. Hold on to the guys, see how the team looks. That's not what they're going to do. That's not what they're going to do. They're just going to stay pat. They're not doing anything big. So if that's the case, remember, also a few weeks ago, I told you guys they need to pick one or two roads. Either one, they need to pick the road I just described, where you try to see how the rest of the season looks like if you go get an impact player so you can have a better mindset moving into next year. Or you need to buy completely into what this season is, which is a failure, move off your assets, get future assets in return that better situate you for the offseason, which they keep talking about. They keep talking about their flexibility for this offseason. They keep talking about the cap flexibility they have for this offseason. You want to know what they don't have? They don't have a bunch of picks in this offseason. There was a tweet that I saw the other day. It talked about all these other teams that have, actually, I believe it said, this number it probably isn't exactly right, but it was like 67% or something, 70% of the league's picks are owned by 10 teams. So it's a 30-team league, and somewhere around that number are owned by 10 teams. And on that list, if I remember correctly, there's like 4 to 5 teams that are either rebuilding or young and up and coming that have all these picks from across the league. You want to know who doesn't have any of that? The Detroit Pistons. They're behind every other team in assets. But yet the Detroit Pistons, in a season that's lost, still don't want to move off their assets to get future assets to better position themselves to make trades in the offseason. You want to know what helps you make trades? Cap space and having picks. The Pistons don't have a bunch of picks. They only have cap space. Imagine if they were able to move off a Boyan for maybe a late first, and then they were able to get multiple seconds with Burks, or they were able to get multiple seconds with DeMonte Morris. You're just stacking up the treasure chest. So when this offseason comes around that everyone's swearing they have a plan for, now you have cap space. You have your own pick that's going to be high, plus multiple future picks. That's all that stuff you don't have from before. Monte Morris, expiring contract. Alec Burks, expiring contract. Boyan Bogdanovic, non-guaranteed contract. These guys may not even be on the team next year. And you're refusing to move them for future assets that could help you move in the offseason? For what? To win maybe 3 more games and get to 9 games instead of 10? Or get to 10 games instead of 9? I don't understand this mindset. Okay, you don't want to make a big move. Don't make a big move. Don't move any of the core 4. But at least get future value to build a good team around these 4 guys this offseason. I don't get it. That's what I don't understand. And that's why I think it's a big failure. When this trade deadline passes and they don't move these guys for assets, for value, it's going to be another season while I'm sitting here questioning. It's been 4 straight years that you guys have listened to me on this podcast talk about what's going on with the asset management. What's happening? It's been 4 years. I don't get it. Maybe I just never will. Maybe it's just something this front office doesn't value that much. Maybe I don't know. I don't get it. Let me know what you guys think. Comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. When we come back, could Tobias Harris, former Detroit Piston, end up back in Detroit this offseason? We'll talk about that when we come back. But first, I've got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors. I've got to tell you guys about one of my favorite sponsors, FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hopefully, Lions fans, we've gotten over, the loss in the conference championship, and we can enjoy the Super Bowl. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday has always been about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, hanging out with friends, and having a good time, and also placing some super bets that 100% are going to win, obviously. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, channeling LeBron James here, or 6, or 7. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Again, $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today and get that $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. The NBA trade deadline is fast approaching, and Locked On Fantasy Basketball is your place for live reaction Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube today so you don't miss Josh Lloyd breaking down every NBA trade with analysis and insight you can only get from Locked On Fantasy Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. So, one of the names that the Detroit Pistons have been linked to, going back months, we've talked about him on the podcast a few times, is former Detroit Piston Tobias Harris. He is on an expiring contract, and there has been rumors about him coming back to Detroit since, I'd say, December. I think it was when we first started talking about it, when I first started talking about it on the podcast, and it was first starting to get rumored. I believe it was around December. And the noise is starting to heat up again with Tobias to Detroit as of a few days ago. James Edwards talked about Tobias Harris and the rumors around him in his article that we just spoke about. Not going to read his whole, blurb on it. You guys should be reading it yourselves. But basically, what he says, to summarize what he says in here, is that he would not expect, or it doesn't seem like the Pistons are going to make a move for Tobias Harris at the trade deadline. They probably are going to wait until the offseason to try to go after him and get him away from Philadelphia and any other team that's interested in Tobias Harris. So again, another just, kicking the can down the road, cap space, cap flexibility this offseason. We're really going to take this swing, wait for it, and we're going to get Tobias Harris. So, first, do I think the Pistons should trade for Tobias Harris? Yeah, I would try to go after Tobias Harris in the trade market before the trade deadline. Why? For two reasons. One, he's a really good player, would help. And two, you could play him at the 4, obviously, like all that stuff. He's really good. I really like Tobias. But two, just because you have cap space in free agency does not mean you are going to get him in free agency. It's not a guarantee that you can get Tobias Harris from the Philadelphia 76ers. It's not a guarantee that you can get Tobias Harris from one of the other teams that will be interested in a really good player who can play the 3 and the 4, can spread the floor, and has gotten better defensively, and can help any contender. You're not going to be the only team going after Tobias Harris. You're not going to be the only team interested in Tobias Harris. You're probably going to be the worst team going after Tobias Harris. That's the only thing you can guarantee, is that you're probably going to be the worst team going after Tobias Harris. That's like a guarantee. That's all you can guarantee. So, yes, I would try to trade for him before the deadline, get him in, and re-sign him this upcoming offseason. If you trade for him, he has connections to Detroit. Now, this is true. He does have connections to Detroit, has some family ties still to Detroit. Very much loved being here in Detroit. There's a lot of things I've heard about his connection with Detroit over the last few months. I think the mutual interest is real. I do think that's the case. And I think if you trade for him, it's very almost 100% likely you'll be able to re-sign him in the offseason. This upcoming offseason, though, without trading for him, I just think it's a little more risky without getting him into the building for these last few months. Build something with him, show him why he needs to be here, that looks good here, all that kind of stuff. I think that helps position yourself to re-sign him rather than just going into free agency with him coming off of Philadelphia. Imagine what if Philadelphia goes deep into the playoffs. Imagine if Philadelphia goes, has a great, maybe they make the finals or something. Does he want to leave then? Does he want to leave Philly after that? Who knows? Does Philly want to move on from him after that? All that stuff, I think it's just more risky to just wait. But moving on from that, I do think the interest is real. We've talked about it for months on the podcast. There is mutual interest between the two. Detroit would like to have Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris loves the city. Again, has connections, family connections. So I think that's the name you're probably going to hear in the offseason. And I think if they don't trade for him in the offseason, I would say it's like 80%, 70%, 80%, somewhere around there that he does sign with the Detroit Pistons, that the Pistons do get him. I just think that percentage raises if you trade for him before. I think your chances of resigning him raise, whereas it's more risky to just wait for the offseason. But whatever, if they want to wait for the offseason, it seems like their whole plan is to wait till the offseason, then I guess so. Go ahead and wait and take the chance and hope maybe another team doesn't swim away in the offseason. But to talk about Tobias Harris, the player, real quick. That's just the idea behind trading or waiting. Tobias Harris, the player, is a really good player. He's averaging 18 points a game this year. He's shooting 51% from the field, 35% from deep, 90% from the free throw line. He's shooting 3.4 attempts from deep. This is actually a down year for him from beyond the arc. Since 2017-18, his last year in Detroit, moving all the way up until last season, he actually has been a 39% three-point shooter on 4.5 attempts. Again, this is a down year for him this past year, but for the last 6 years, he's been a really, really good three-point shooter. And I expect his three-point shooting to regress back to the mean next year, or maybe even throughout the rest of the year, that he'll regress back to the mean. Again, a really good offensive basketball player, a guy who can play 3 and 4. He can play the 4 position. I think he would enable you to be able to play Cade, Ivy, Asar, Tobias, Duren. I think he fits right into that. He's become a better defender as his career has went on, a more engaged defender, a more impactful defender. It's not like he's an all-defensive guy. I wouldn't say he's like way above league average, but he's a fine defender, and he's better than Bojan, I would say, on the defensive end. A smart basketball player, plays the right way. He's not the greatest playmaker, but you're not asking him to play make. He's not someone you're asking him to go out there and make plays for others. He's a play finisher. He's going to score. He's going to score the basketball. He's going to be high. He's going to be engaged into the game. Obviously, this year, looking at his synergy numbers, 73rd in transition, 93rd percentile in spot-up opportunities, 67th percentile in post-up, 49th percentile in isolations, 79th percentile in cuts, 63rd percentile in handoffs. So this is a dude, he can just flat out score the basketball in just about every other way on the floor. There's not many ways he can't score. Off the dribble, 78th percentile. jump shots, all jump shots, 55th percentile. Around the rim, 55th percentile. Like, he can score on every level of the basketball floor. He's going to help on that on the offensive end of the floor. And I think over Bojan, he'll be an upgrade defensively. I think the biggest attraction to him, obviously, is that he would be a player, I believe, that enables you to play your core four guys together. He's a guy that fits theoretically in what the idea is. So I think the fit makes sense, and their interest in him 100% makes sense. I would happily welcome Tobias Harris to the team. However, I've already seen some Pistons fans talk about this on Twitter, in my YouTube comments, DMing me. If Tobias Harris is the big splash in the offseason, how much better will the Detroit Pistons get? I think that's a fair question. I think Tobias obviously makes them better. But with how bad this team is this year, is Tobias Harris enough to move the needle for this team? I think he makes them better, for sure, 100%. But I don't know how much he changes things. Now, I would hope, I can't guarantee, I don't know, but I would hope that Tobias Harris would not be the only move they make in the offseason. Like, I hope they're not just adding Tobias Harris and re-signing Monte Morris and Alec Burks. Like, I hope that's not their idea for this offseason. Part of me believes that's what they're going to try to do. I think they want to bring back Alec Burks. I think they want to bring back Monte Morris. Like, there is a part of me that believes that they will seriously consider just bringing it back and adding like one or two players, like Tobias Harris and maybe like a backup center. Like, I think that's it. I think they'll consider that. I think that will be a massive failure if they do that. I think that would be a massive mistake. So if you're just adding Tobias Harris, I think it's fair to question, this is the offseason. Like, if you're a fan of the team, if you're sitting there saying, this is the offseason you've been selling us on, that this is going to be the aggressive offseason to make us be patient through the worst season in NBA history, the big prize is Tobias Harris. Like, I think that's a fair thing for fans to say. That is a 100% fair thing for fans to believe. I'm just going to hope that this front office would not just make the Tobias Harris move. I'd have to hope that they would be going after Tobias Harris and then also making another trade for an even bigger impact player that becomes available to come back with a real team. Like, that would be that's my hope, and that's what they're really selling the fan base on. This is what they're selling the fan base on, that it's not going to be just a one-move offseason, that they got so much flexibility, they got so much cap space. They want to be good next year. We want to be in the play. We want to make the playoffs. We're going to make this big jump in this offseason. Trust us. Be patient. Like, that's what they're selling the fan base on this offseason. So if they come out of this offseason with just Tobias Harris and then re-sign Monte Morris and Alec Burks, I don't blame any fan that's in there the whole offseason saying, I can't do it. It's over. I can't do it with this team. I don't blame it, because that is a highly questionable offseason to have. But nonetheless, Tobias Harris, the player, he would be a good fit. I like him on this team. I would entertain trading for him, but if the Sixers are trying to, really just fleece you, obviously you stay away from it and then you take the chance in the offseason. But I would not be shocked at all. I would probably, if I was a betting man, and maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but I would bet money that Tobias Harris probably ends up on the Pistons in the offseason. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. When we come back, there's interest apparently in Monte Morris and Killian Hayes. We'll talk about that, whether the Pistons should move off of these guys when we come back. But first, I've got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, BetterHelp. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get on your way to being your best self. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, whether it be big or whether it be small. Certain things can really start to get to you in life. It's important to let that out and not let it just build up inside, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. Therapy is there for everybody out there, and everyone has struggles getting through what we call life every single day. Whether you want to strengthen one of your strengths, or maybe you want to strengthen one of your weaknesses, no matter what, having someone to talk to, again, that's unbiased on your life, I think is a great opportunity for everybody and something that everyone should consider. Therapy can be different for anybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, and you get an online therapist and you don't feel like you guys are vibing, you want to switch online therapists, well, you can switch just like that with BetterHelp and get to a different online therapist. Again, it's all entirely online. It's designed to be flexible for you. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Monte Morris and Killian Hayes. This is going to be a quick segment. Monte Morris was mentioned in James' article that there is a team out there that there may be multiple teams interested in Monte Morris, obviously. But one of the teams that have the most interest, according to James, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They tried apparently to trade for Monte Morris when he was in Washington before he was eventually traded to Detroit. But James also goes on to say in this article that the Pistons value what Morris brings to the table as a veteran guard who can take care of the ball and can shoot. So what this sounds like to me is that the Pistons are not going to move off of Monte Morris. They like him and they want to bring him back past the deadline. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if they just try to bring everyone back in the offseason. That's what it seems like. So should they move off of Monte Morris? Yes, they should. They should be moving off of Monte Morris, getting whatever value they can from the Minnesota Timberwolves or whatever team is interested in, whether it's 1 second, 2 seconds, whatever it is. Get value that you don't already have for him before this deadline, before he is he's expiring. So before he just leaves or you try to re-sign him, which I don't think you should be doing anyways. And then also there's apparent interest in Killian Hayes by the Memphis Grizzlies. Someone wrote an article for the Grizzlies talking about why the Pistons would be, or not the Pistons, why the Grizzlies would be interested in Killian Hayes. It's all about salary cap and getting underneath the luxury tax. I think that would be a good fit for Killian Hayes to fight for his NBA career. Basically, what he's competing on for the back end of this season would be a 1+1 in the offseason, to take a chance on me, a 1-year deal with the team option on the second, kind of the same thing that Josh Jackson signed with the Pistons, Kevin Knox signed with the Pistons. And when the Grizzlies being just destroyed by injuries and basically out of anything and just basically tanking for the rest of this year, that would probably be a situation where Killian Hayes could go to play, hopefully have a good second half of the season for him, and then be able to get that contract to take a chance on him by some other team. So I think that would work. I think the Pistons would move off of Killian Hayes for just about anything. I don't think they'd be asking for anything in return for him. At least they shouldn't be. I think that would be a good spot if you're someone who wants to see Killian succeed and have a chance to succeed. I think Memphis would be a good spot. But yeah, they definitely should be moving off of Killian before the deadline, whether it's to Memphis or whatever. Just get off of him, get him off the roster, and move him somewhere else. They should be doing the same thing with Monte Morris, getting value for him. And same thing I said a few segments ago for Alec Burks as well and Bojan Bogdanovic. But we'll see if they actually do anything before the deadline. I want to hear from you guys. If you guys had to predict, do the Detroit Pistons make any move before the deadline? Let me know what you guys think. Comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on our podcast platforms. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Leave us, or I almost said that twice. Give us a subscribe at the YouTube channel, Locked On Pistons. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace out.